Gina loves to say design systems are for hybrids, and our next speaker is living proof. She is a design technologist working on the Gestalt design system at Pinterest. There, she works across design and engineering teams to create accessible, scalable interfaces through design systems and React component libraries. She is also a part of the W3C Design Tokens community group and loves traveling with her husband and dog Pepper and trying as many new foods as possible along the way. Here to present a talk titled, No Need for Bridges, How Design Technologists Dissolve the Design and Engineering Gap, help me give a warm clarity welcome to Ayesha Mazrana.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining. I'm Ayesha Mazrana, and today I want to talk about how design technologists fill the gap between design and engineering, thereby eliminating any need for bridges. I currently work as a design technologist on the design systems team at Pinterest. I've been over there for just over a year now, but prior to that, I've been working as a UX engineer and design technologist for over 6 years. And I've done it at 3 different size companies, a really large one, a small startup, and now one kind of in the middle. And no matter where I've been working, I've seen the power that design technologists can have on any team and how they create more connected teams that really build trust between each other, no matter if they're designers or engineers. Today I want to talk about who design technologists are and what the work involves, but also most importantly, how people can take on a design technologist mindset no matter their title. Now, before I go any further, I just want to clear up the naming situation. Design technologists can have a ton of different names. It could be creative technologist, UI engineer, UX engineer, UI developer, even a front-end developer, depending where they sit within an organization. So while there are nuances between these different titles, for the sake of this talk, I'm going to bundle it all into the term design technologists. Now, who are design technologists? I think if I were to put it simply, it's people who understand and operate within both design and engineering spaces. So they might be familiar with design critiques and design principles, but they might also be able to code or jump into engineering at any time. Another way of putting it, I see them as very multilingual people. So they either understand designers, and they understand engineers, and they understand researchers and writers and program managers. It doesn't matter who they're working with, they can be there to listen, and they can understand everyone that they're working with and make them feel heard. Now, the work itself can span a really wide variety of topics, and it can span the entire product development lifecycle. So it might be something like joining brainstorming workshops very early on before a feature is even built at all or even designed, and it's just blue sky thinking. Design technologists are great participants there. They could also enjoy office hours and design critiques and join them to help others understand what limitations might be when it comes to building time or check out for accessibility issues. They can also prototype different features and products and use those for user research sessions and work really closely with research teams. They can also build components. This is very common, especially with design to systems teams, that they implement components into code on a frequent basis. After implementing the components, they're also really talented at writing documentation. Because they understand the language of both designers and engineers, they can translate and contribute to guidelines for both sides. And last but not least, they can make updates directly into an interface. It might be accessibility changes, if you're like me and you specialize a little bit in accessibility, or maybe you implement animation details for the product. But no matter what, design technologists can contribute throughout an entire product lifecycle. Here's an example of a more specific day-to-day for me. So in the morning, I might be meeting with feature designers who have a proposed component change that they've come across while trying to develop a new feature. I might be looking out for accessibility issues or just things that don't quite fit our design system's patterns and guidelines. After that, I might make an accessibility update to a current component. This could be a bug that the QA team found, or it could be something that we are proactively fixing because we know we have room to improve. After that, maybe I'm meeting with an iOS engineer. I've recently implemented color design tokens, and I want to make sure that the implementation I've done for Objective-C and Swift is what that engineer expects to work with in their product. From there, I might be writing best practices documentation. So for the component that I just updated, or maybe a new one that we introduced recently, I'll write best practice documentation for both designers and engineers to help them understand when and how to use our components. And last but not least, a large majority of my time is working with my design systems team. We'll be reviewing feature requests or component enhancements, maybe even talk about deprecating a component, or bigger picture stuff like what does our documentation site look like, or what tools or plugins could be built for our engineering teams. At a higher level, design technologists can work across a myriad of things. They can create and implement design tokens. Like I said, I've been working on color design tokens recently, and I work really closely with designers and engineers through that process. They can also introduce new processes for design and engineering teams, like plugins for Figma that allow designers to understand accessibility requirements. They can also produce onboarding sessions for both designers and engineers. This is something that I've been really passionate about lately, to help designers and engineers understand accessibility onboarding items, as well as Gestalt design system onboarding items, to ensure that both of our designers and all of our engineers understand how to use the system and how to work with us. Design technologists can also prototype new components, and like I said earlier, this can be really helpful for customer research sessions. It gives everyone a chance to test out and experiment features before they commit time to designing and building them. And last but not least, as I mentioned, many design technologists might have a type of specialty that they focus on throughout their work. For me, that's accessibility updates for our design processes, but also in our product and our internal tools. At the high level, I believe design technologists really help build trust between design and engineering. They are there to ensure that each side gets heard, the pain points are met, and that they feel listened to and supported throughout their work, because they have someone who can understand both sides and do any translating needed. So I know I'm a little biased, obviously, as a design technologist myself. I decided to ask the people I work closely with why they think design technology is helpful. A Design Sisters engineer on the team mentioned that from a collaboration angle, it's really valuable to have someone who can act as a designer with a technical viewpoint and as an engineer with a design viewpoint. And from an execution angle, it's valuable to have a floater who can pick up design or engineering tasks based on different needs and resource availability. A design systems designer mentioned that this role plays like a mediator in the design systems team, seeing things from both sides while implementing tools and processes to increase productivity. A product designer felt that design technologists are the people who help the architect avoid building or designing things that the engineers can't or shouldn't build. And the design systems manager mentioned that a key ingredient to creating mutually beneficial solutions is to have folks on the team that have a deep understanding of both groups' needs, how they relate to each other, and how they can relate to the larger system. All of that to say, in my eyes, if the design system is the tool that closes the gap between design and engineering, I really see design technologists as being the people equivalent. They are there to help create that common language the same way the design system is. They can translate between teams, they can empathize with both sides, and they can mediate and find creative solutions that move everyone forward. If you're wondering now, okay, how do I become a design technologist? I really strongly feel that there's no one ideal path. Personally, I did a 4-year computer science degree, but during my 3rd and 4th year, I found myself taking a lot of design and human-computer interaction classes, and frequently focusing on the customer research, the UX, the design, the color system, all of those choices rather than the databases or the security that went behind the scenes in the back end. And so I knew that I wanted to keep my technical side and keep coding, but I wanted to be on a more creative path that's a little bit earlier in the product development life cycle. And that's how I ended up as first a UX engineer and now a design technologist. But I've had people who I work with who came from boot camps, who were maybe engineer by trade, and did design boot camps so that they could better empathize with the people they work with on the design side. Or I've seen designers take engineering boot camps who learn how to code and start prototyping and creating all kinds of really unique experiences that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. Really, at the end of it, I see being a design technologist less about a certain skill set and much more about a mindset. I think in the end, the mindset is that we create people-first solutions for both designers and engineers, and that in turn brings them closer together. Because we're focusing so much on the people we work with in an effort to create a great product, we create really strong teams that help understand each other frequently and trust each other to build and create without fear. I also think it kind of boils down into 4 big themes that I see across a lot of design technologists that I've worked with. I see them collaborate really well and mediate really effectively, but I also see them rally huge groups of people and continuously explore new ideas. As collaborators, I find that design technologists work really closely with people across all kinds of departments, and they do that to understand their work and hear their pain points. So if you're trying to adopt this mindset, as a designer, you might pair with your engineer while they implement your design specs and really pay attention to where they struggle, what's hard, and what's working well. On the other side, if you're an engineer, you might sit in on design critiques frequently to understand how trade-offs are made and how decisions are presented, and how feedback is given to designers to understand why something is the way it is. And no matter what team you're working on or what your title is, I highly recommend joining as many user research sessions as possible, because that lets you really empathize with your customers, who are ultimately the people you want to help. As mediators, I find design technologists work across organizations and work with many different stakeholders to determine a path forward. They're constantly looking for feasibility. Is this something we can actually build, no matter what phase it's in? Is it scalable? Will it be future-proof? Will we have to constantly make changes in the future in order to accommodate people? Is it accessible? Obviously, everything we're working on, we constantly want to make sure it's as accessible as possible. And last but not least, is it usable or enjoyable? Is it something that ultimately our customers are going to appreciate and enjoy using? As mediators, design technologists can see when goals are conflicting between design and engineering. For example, component flexibility if you're on a design systems team. And by looking at the minimum requirements and what the real ultimate goal is behind the project, they're able to flesh out the details and help demonstrate the possibilities of a particular feature, perhaps with something like prototyping. This has come up a lot for me recently as our design system matures and we're starting to work on components that are very composed. They're no longer at the low level, but they are involving multiple components themselves. And we're constantly figuring out how much do we lock down from the design side versus how much flexibility do we give to people who are implementing this component. As a design technologist, a lot of my job is looking at the trade-offs between different options and potentially prototyping those different solutions to help showcase what might work well and what might not work well. As a rallier, design technologists are never hesitant to take on large-scale projects. They work with a lot of stakeholders, both internally and externally, and they use that energy and momentum to get a lot of people behind a project. It might be a very blue sky project, but that's part of the fun. We use case studies or prototypes or past research experiences and detailed plans to help people understand what the benefits of a particular project are and the specific work that might be involved by each party. In my role, I actually take this on by being the Scrum Master for our team. I work really hard every sprint planning to work with our designers and engineers to figure out what work needs to be done for a given project and how the design side might affect the timing of the engineering side or vice versa. And I think having people who try to step out of their area of expertise and really look at the big picture is really helpful for a team to move forward. Last but not least, explorers. Design technologists never stop being curious. They're constantly trying to expand their horizons to understand the totality of a problem. So while I started in the engineering side, I'm frequently and constantly working to understand designers better, either by learning Figma tools better or by attending critiques and office hours and anything I can to work with designers and understand them just a little bit better. I recommend, if you're an engineer trying to learn a design tool, or if you're a designer, maybe try learning a programming language. It doesn't have to be perfect. There is no level of perfection really when you're working on this stuff, as it's constantly evolving. But just having a little bit more empathy and past experience on the other side of the table really helps people. You can also meet with people in sales or marketing or legal to get a different perspective on what customers are really loving or what they're complaining about. And last but not least, outside of the company, seek out unique user perspectives. Learn from people who use technology differently than you, who use technology in a different country than you. As much as you can, expand your horizons and really take in as many different perspectives as possible. In the end, I think design technologists thrive in both design and engineering spaces. They translate the needs of each organization, and they really work to make people feel comfortable with what they're working with and feel like they have someone to talk to no matter which side of the table they're working on. As a result, the teams they work with become stronger. They become more aware of cross-functional needs and goals. And in the end, I think this builds trust. It can lead to a more inclusive environment and ultimately a more resilient, usable product because you're taking care of a lot of issues very early on in the cycle that don't pop up later down the line and don't need further work in the future. To wrap this all up, I hope everyone here feels encouraged and supported to think like a design technologist, to maybe learn a new language or a new tool, and potentially broaden your horizon. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so much, Ayesha, for joining us.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I've been looking forward to this talk because this is my jam. I think I mentioned it earlier at the beginning of the day, but yeah, I am definitely what you would call a design technologist, or a hybrid, a unicorn, whatever word you want to throw out there. But yeah, I am. I think I don't know if I mentioned this before, but my formal background is actually in design. I have an art degree, and I taught myself in engineering coding. I don't know, maybe 10 years ago at this point. And I love design system space because it lets me go back and use my art degree, which I don't get to use normally in my day job because I get paid to code. But yeah, I love this idea of I love the term design technologist because it does meld the two disciplines and the two responsibilities and two skill sets pretty together pretty well, and it kind of gives a better indication of what this job actually entails. It's not just designing things and creating the UI or the UX or something. And it's not just implementation. It's all of the above, and it's basically anything you want to do with design and technology. You can pretty much have that term apply to almost anything, which is great.
Exactly. That's why I love that term too. This is actually the first time in my career I've been called a design technologist. Prior to this, I was a UX engineer. And I think I'm learning to really appreciate the design technologist terminology even more now because, like you said, it's such an umbrella term that can encompass so much that it leaves a lot of room for experimentation and being able to change day to day what you want to focus on, or month to month, whatever it might be.
Yeah, definitely. I think it reminds me of, I think someone asked a question on Twitter maybe a month or so ago. They were asking people in design system space, what do you call yourself? Or are you an engineer who codes, or or engineer who designs, I should say, or a designer who codes? And I was like, yes, Yes. And I just love, like, I saw a bunch of people throw around the term like a design engineer, which I think is kind of similar to what you're talking about. But I've also noticed that, at least in my case, what people call me depends on the context in which they first discover me. Because
Yeah,
the people who are engineers or more like in tech definitely say that I'm an engineer, but most people in the design system space and that clarity would call me a designer because they assume that being a design systems person, I am a designer. And I'm just like, yeah, you can call me whatever you want. The work does not change. I don't really care what the title is at this point, but yeah.
exactly. So true.
Cool. So let's go get in right into some audience questions here. Okay, so we have the first question here is from I'm gonna say Wale, and I hope I pronounced the name correctly. Where can we find good stats in support of making a case for design technologists? Like design systems, they seem to be this paradigm shift that requires a buy-in from executives and higher ups. So how can we make a good case for creating this role?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. I will be honest, stats wise in particular, I don't know exactly where you might find those. I'm hoping some do exist. I actually haven't looked into numbers, but I will say I personally think having any kind of like personal recommendation from someone, I think goes a lot further than numbers. I know in a business sense, numbers tend to be what matter, but I think having someone who can give like a personal plea, that might be like, oh, at my past company, I worked with a design technologist and it was amazing because XYZ. I think anytime we get that chance to kind of use a personal experience that we've had working with someone who might fall into this category, I my hope is that managers and leadership will listen to that. I also think it's a little bit hard sometimes with a role that does have so many names. I think every now and then that kind of hurts us because it's hard to say, okay, this company has 10 UX engineers and this company has 2 design technologists, like clearly they're falling behind or something. Well, they might have 2 design technologists, but they might have 12, design engineers or whatever they call it. So I think having so many different names for this type of role can also sometimes be a little bit tricky to help find those stats behind like teams that have this. But I'm hoping as it becomes a little bit more common and we all get the chance hopefully to work with someone who falls into this realm, that we can use that personal recommendation and go further and hopefully build out more teams that include this role.
Yeah, that actually that reminds me of something that I've considered when trying to make a case for design system as a whole, like what the metrics of success would be. And I discovered that for design, at least in my experience, there's much more qualitative data versus quantitative. Like it's really hard to quantify a lot of the benefits and work that we do. So that the fact that you're going to say to build a case to even create this role definitely relies more on like the qualitative data and the qualitative of metrics versus like finding actual like head count and like butts and seats kind of thing. So
Yep.
yeah. Okay, so let's see. The next question here is from Lauren. Lauren wants to know, as a hybrid role, there's not often a career framework you can align to. So, how do you recommend design technologists navigate their career and promotions, and how can managers help out people like this?
This is such a pertinent question, especially to my week this week. I'm actually working with my manager currently to build out an entire career levels expectation sheet and documentation for the design technologist role specifically. And I did that at my last company too. I worked with our leadership team to create specific career level expectations for UX engineers because that was my title at that time. But yeah, I think if there isn't something already implemented at the company that you're working for, I think if you have the chance at all, being able to work with your manager or your leadership team or your org, or even just other people who identify as this same kind of design technologist role, if you have the chance to work with those people to put in writing and solidify career level expectations, I think that's an amazing opportunity. It is one of those things that it kind of falls on your head as a design technologist sometimes if that doesn't already exist at the company. So do be aware that every now and then you're going to get roped into stuff that is totally outside of your like design systems or design work. But I personally am really passionate about creating those career level expectations because I want us to have a framework to hire more design technologists and to make sure that we future proof for anyone else who joins. And I don't mind taking that little bit of time to work with our leadership team to make that possible. I think no matter if you have those expectations written down as part of your company or not, being a really strong self-advocate for what you want to work on, where you see yourself, next year, 5 years from now, whatever it might be. I think that is one of the tricky parts about being in this type of role is that if you have specific things that you really want to grow or want to work on or want to focus on, then every now and then you have to be a little bit more pushy than you might have been if your role was perfectly defined. But it's kind of part of the fun challenge of being in this role and being in something that evolves over time.
It's funny, you mentioned that if you're like the inaugural person in this role and at your company, that you may end up getting kind of roped into a bunch of other things that don't necessarily align with what you envision your responsibilities to be, which kind of leads into the next question from Henri. He wants to know, like, this does sound like an opportunity for a company to burden you with too much work, and which could lead to burnout, as we were talking about yesterday. So how would you go about like navigating this particular this possible outcome and still trying to accomplish the goal of advocating for this role, but also protecting yourself?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's definitely a danger with this kind of umbrella term. If you are seen as both someone who can design and code or do engineering work, then it's entirely possible you get a ton of things on your Jira backlog and you don't have enough hours in a day to work on nearly any of it. So I definitely think, again, I personally figure out, okay, what are my like areas or projects that I'm really passionate about? So right now, accessibility is a huge focus for me. I will never stop wanting to work on accessibility work. So anything that comes to me in that realm, I prioritize. And currently also design tokens work are something that I'm really passionate about. So I'm prioritizing that work. So outside of those two things, if there are other requests that come in that I know I could do, but may not necessarily align with those two passions at the moment, then I try to, work with whoever has made that request to figure out someone else or another team that can take on that work. And I think that kind of system hopefully applies to a lot of people, that because you're seen as this unicorn who can take on whatever needs doing, the more you can be kind of explicit about the things that you would like to work on and the things that will, either help your career or help your personal development, whatever it is you're prioritizing, being really clear that this is the work that falls into it, and I'm totally okay doing anything in this bucket. But if it's in this other bucket, I want to work to see who else can take that on. And, one of the things about I'm currently a design technologist on a design systems team, but I work with designers and engineers who I would also call design technologists. So if I can kind of say no to something that one of them takes on and they can learn from that or grow from that or become even more, a little bit more of a design technologist by taking on that work too, then I think that's a win-win for all of us too. I don't remember who said it or exactly how they phrased it, but when we take on everything and we say yes to everything, no one knows that there's a gap. And that I learned that kind of later in my career, but it really stuck with me because I used to always be the person who'd be like, yes, I'll do that, and I'll do that, and I'll do that. And I would be completely burnt out and overwhelmed. And I realized no one was looking to hire another design technologist or UX engineer because I was taking it all on, and they didn't think there was a gap because I was saying yes. And so one of the most powerful things you can do to grow your team of design technologists, or just in general, is say no to the work that you can't do, because it means that leadership notices there's a hole that needs to be filled, and that can help add more design technologists to your team?
Yeah, definitely. This actually that resonates so well for me because I am a I there's no way to say this without sounding like I'm pumping myself up or whatever. I tend to be a really high performer, and so get a lot of I get a lot of work done in a shorter amount of time than other people on my team may do. And for that reason, I tend to get more work and more responsibilities and more things asked of me. Hence my kind of funny but also serious tweet about success just breeding more work, because I'm very good at my job and so therefore I get more work thrown at me. And so I kind of had to learn how to set those boundaries and basically tell my manager, look, I know you're giving me all these things because you trust me, but this isn't falling into what I think my responsibility should be, or this isn't helping me align with my goals. And I think that it comes with like confidence in your abilities and comfort and sort of a psychological security with your manager and at your company to be able to set those kind of boundaries and say, hey, this is too much for me. I need help, or you need to hire somebody else, or to basically just kind of say something that lets people know that you can't take on absolutely everything. And some people may not feel safe to do that because it's like, well, crap, they're going to think that I can't do my job if I can't take on everything they want to give me. But I think this is kind of this wisdom and the security that comes with with being further along in your career, and again having a really good and supportive management team in place to basically know that you can say something like that. It'll be taken seriously and not held against you or held against the goals you're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Any good management team and leadership team will recognize your pushing back as a sign that something in the org needs to change and not a personal kind of fault. Definitely.
Yeah, it did take me a while to kind of figure that, because I was just like, well, if I tell them I'm struggling, they're going to think that I can't do this job, and like, what if I won't be able to get promotions? And I was like, it was all in my head, and I finally just told my manager one day, I'm like, look, I'm kind of drowning here, and then she was like, well, you could have said something sooner. Like, I can definitely pull somebody else on, or I can do this and that. And I was just like, it was like such a breath of fresh air. I'm like, why was I suffering? Why was I suffering this whole time? Just say something. Okay, cool. Sorry, let me get to the one last question here. Let me see if I can find one that I'm gonna like. Okay, so how would you it's kind of going along what we just talked about. How do you or your managers think about career growth and development as a design technologist?
That's such a fantastic question. I think one thing I've fallen into the trap of is because I'm a design technologist on a design systems team. When I first started writing these career level expectations, I kept on framing them in the mindset of a design systems team, right? But design technologists can really take on anything, right? And so if you do work within a design systems team, maybe you go on to be more of a product manager for the design system or the design systems if you have multiple, because as a product manager, you can work really closely with the designers and understand their struggles or their needs or what they're requesting from the engineering side. On the engineering side, you can relate to them really well because you understand code maybe, and you can speak their language as well. And I think product management is definitely one way that I see design technologists growing, as long as they're okay with maybe taking a little bit of a step back from being a little more hands-on on the code or the designs themselves. But I also think you can really deep dive into the more of the IC track, right? And stay really in the weeds of the design work and the engineering work and become more of a engineering lead on your design team, become more of a design lead on your engineering team. You can kind of, in a sense, like with the bridging the gap model, you can kind of work to really fill in whatever gap there might be as needed. It might change week to week. And so I think as design technologists continue in their career, that's always an option to really become kind of not only a mentor, but an expert on either side that people can really go to who are outside your team, especially to get answers. I also think, I saw a bunch of people in the chat are like, are you a designer who codes or an engineer who designs? I think on either side of that too, you could also kind of switch sides as you grow in your career if you want. So if me personally, I've been an engineer, more on the engineering side my whole life. And so, I could see myself in the future going a lot more into the design side and getting really familiar with design tools and working really closely with user research teams and being even earlier on in the process. But yeah, I think that's the beauty of design technology. I think as your career grows, you have so many different options. You could become an accessibility guru who gets really into, if you already know web, maybe you branch out into mobile and then you become kind of an accessibility design technologist. So many options. I think it's overwhelming. I totally understand that that's an overwhelming answer, that it's basically like, you can do anything. But I think that's also part of the beauty.
Yeah, definitely. It's like the embarrassment of like choice and riches in that sense. Yeah, it's like my career could look any way I want it to look. And you're like, oh wait, my career could look any way I want it to look. Oh no. Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, anyway, well, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. Like I said, I really loved your talk. I really loved with the way you approached everything, and you were very delightful to talk to. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mina.